Is that John Sevier over there? I believe it is. What are these now?
Those are British coins that would have been in circulation when we were a colony, a British colony. The British didn't want much gold and silver wealth in the colonies, so these were very restricted. Now this one is actually a continental dollar, and the interesting thing about it is in early America you could purchase a deer skin for $1. And so people began to refer to the dollar as a buckskin, and then they just shortened it and started calling it a buck.
Well, Bob Jones, you are here at the Heritage Day, King Family Library.
Yes, sir.
2023, and you are portraying somebody. Who could it be? Some historical figure. Who is that?
John Sevier.
John Sevier. And that name is very familiar if you live in Sevier County, of course. Tell us a little bit about John Sevier.
Well, John Sevier was born in Northern Virginia, September 23rd, 1745. He had a 12th grade education at a time when most people never learned how to read and write. He married a young lady at the age of 16, his age, and they had 10 children together.
10 children, that's a lot.
Yes, sir. His first wife passed away after their 10th child was born. And just a couple of years prior to that, he had saved the life of Katherine Sherrill during an attack at Fort Watauga. And so after his first wife passed away, he and Katherine got reacquainted. Everyone was calling her Bonnie Kate.
Bonnie Kate, I've heard that name.
And Bonnie Kate became his second wife. Mm-hmm. They were married and had 8 more children. And right while they were celebrating the wedding was when he saw the letter from Patrick Ferguson threatening to bring the British Army in, hang all the leaders in the settlements, and destroy the settlements by fire and sword. Mm-hmm. And so they sent word out to all the men to meet at Sycamore Shoals in September. And in that month, in 1780, every man in the settlement showed up. So they would have no one left to defend from Cherokee raids. So they left every third man behind, and the rest of them marched over to Kings Mountain, where they wound up not only stopping Ferguson, but they killed him in the battle and destroyed 1/4 of the army under Cornwallis. Prior to that, the Patriots in the South had been losing every battle. And after Kings Mountain, the Patriots won every major battle until Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown.
Was this one of John Sevier's first engagements in battle, or had he been active earlier?
He had been active earlier. He had actually worked as a scout some during the French and Indian War. So he had military experience. He was a natural military leader. He was chosen as a militia leader by the people in the Watauga settlements. And he won 35 major battles commanding troops. His last battle was the Battle of Hightower in North Georgia, while Tennessee was the Southwest Territory, following the massacre of the family at Cavett Station. They pursued the force of Creeks, Cherokees, and other Indians and defeated them at the Battle of Hightower. And that was his 35th major battle. He's the only Revolutionary War leader who never lost a major battle.
Mm-hmm. He also, early on, fought with the Indians and acquired a nickname, didn't he?
Well, by 1776, he and his family had relocated to a place along the Nullichucky River called Mount Pleasant. He was very popular with the men as a military leader, and they nicknamed him Nullichucky Jack. Mm-hmm. And that remained his nickname for the remainder of his life.
Are you aware that there was an outdoor theater in Gatlinburg that had the Chucky Jack story?
Many years ago.
Many years ago, yeah. Certainly did. And the people who donated or are responsible for the reference library upstairs, Rel and Wilma Maples, were the people behind that.
I see.
Yes, indeed. And they called him Nola Chucky Jack, shortened to Chucky Jack. There you go. Well, so John Sevier's place in battles was a very well-deserved thing, and he certainly received a lot of honors in it. And there's some folklore that has sprung up about it, or maybe it's the truth, but there's some story about this woman in a fort and him rescuing her. What is that story?
That would have been Katherine Sherrill. That would have been his second wife. In 1776, they were at Fort Watauga, and she was caught outside the gate when the Cherokee attacked. And as she was running down along the wall of the fort to avoid being captured, he saw her, but his rifle was empty because he'd been shooting at the warriors attacking. So he set his rifle aside and he withdrew his pistol, and he leaned over the wall as far as he could and dropped her closest pursuer. Then he threw his pistol into the yard inside the fort, and he grabbed her hands and lifted her over the top of the wall and got her inside the fort where she was safe. And then a few years later, Sarah passed away, and in October of 1780, or in August of 1780 rather, that's when he and Bonnie Kate were married.
Was Bonnie Kate his last wife?
She was his last wife.
Okay. And there must be some other colorful stories about old John, other than the history, though the history is interesting too. Do any of those come to mind?
Well, he was elected governor in 1796 when this became a state. He was elected governor of that year, and he had a great deal of notoriety and a great deal of respect. And there was a young up-and-coming attorney by the name of Andrew Jackson. And he and John Sevier got crossways with each other, and to the point that he once said that Jackson was a pettifogging scoundrel who could not get his own wife and had to take another man's. So
them's fighting words.
That's exactly what happened. He was challenged. Jackson challenged him to a duel, and for some reason they never could come together on the duel. He was serving in the federal legislature when the war started in 1812. He expected that he would be called upon to lead troops, and instead they called upon Jackson. But Jackson's wins in battle at Horseshoe Bend and again later in New Orleans, at that point, just before he died, Sevier did begrudgingly admit that he had to give respect to Jackson for military prowess.
So you're holding the firearm that is known to be associated with John Sevier?
Yes, this is a American long rifle, and there's a great deal of debate about whether it was more common for people in the militia, as John Sevier was a militia leader, whether it was more common for people to use a musket or a rifle. A musket was a smooth bore. Its range was only out to about 50 yards, maybe 75, but it would be loaded and fired quickly, whereas a rifle had a range out to 300 yards, but it took much longer to load. Most people could only afford one gun, and when you lived in the frontier, you had to live off the land, and as a result, a rifle would have been far more practical for the people on the frontier than a musket. Now, whichever gun you had, that's what you fought with. And there was no doubt there was a mixture of muskets and rifles used in the militia, but in all likelihood, if someone had brought a musket, they had probably served in the militia back east, and they simply brought their musket with them. Whereas if you were moving out here to live, you would have preferred to have a rifle, because you didn't know that you were going to have to fight every day, but you did know that you were going to have to eat every day. And so the rifle was a far more practical tool that you could then also use for self-defense.
So for hunting and
fighting.
There you go.
Yes.
And this specific gun, once more, this I assume is a replica?
This is a replica of the Pennsylvania style of the American long rifle.
The American long rifle. Okay. Well, a lot of John Sevier can be found in the history books, the details of his life and so forth.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are some things that are less commonly known, maybe even he seemed a very serious man. Are there more lighter things about him? Any fun things? Was he always fighting Indians and rescuing maidens?
No, not really. He lived life for pleasure just like everyone else. One of the things that people might find interesting was that he did operate a still on his property, but many people did simply because during the colonial period, the British would not allow very much currency to be used. They didn't want us to have much gold or silver wealth, and we had to substitute other things for currency. And one of the things that we substituted was distilled spirits. Mm-hmm. And so if you distilled spirits, that had a set value. You could walk into any store and use it to purchase goods. Mm-hmm. And so if you distilled your own, it was a bit like being able to print your own money.
Oh my. Well, when I heard made as moonshine, I thought of the Scotch-Irish. What is his
ancestry?
Yes.
French, Huguenots.
French
Those
Huguenot.
were the Protestants in France during the early period. And the King of France rescinded an edict that prohibited the Catholic from discriminating against the Huguenots. And when that happened, things for the Huguenots gradually became worse as the Catholics started discriminating against them. So his grandfather left England for religious freedom because they were more tolerant of Protestants, and he married a lady named Smith in England. And then John Sevier's father immigrated from England to Baltimore, where he met John Sevier's mother, Joanna Goad, and they were married in the Shenandoah Valley when Sevier was born.
Mm-hmm. There are some highlights in his career, and one of the primary ones would be something associated with this area, and that's the creation of the state of Franklin, right?
Right.
Yes.
That's what I was talking about earlier.
Uh-huh.
There was an effort. We wanted to be a state. The people in the Watauga settlements wanted to be a state. And so they were going to create a state out of the Appalachian Mountains. And the idea was that the state would be supported by Ben Franklin if they named it the state of Franklin. And there was correspondence back and forth between Franklin and Sevier, but they would have known each other because Sevier had served in the legislature in Philadelphia during the Revolutionary War period. And so there was some correspondence back and forth, but Congress never got behind it, and it didn't quite take off. It did lead to some difficulties for Sevier because he had been chosen to be the governor of the state of Franklin, and he did his best to make that work, but it never became recognized as a state. And the North Carolina rescinded the offer and had him arrested for sedition against the state. He was taken to I can't think of the name of the town, Morganton. He was taken to Morganton,
North Carolina.
And yes, North Carolina, across the mountain, and left with the jailer there. But as it turned out, the jailer had stood shoulder to shoulder with Sevier at Kings Mountain, fighting against the British there. And
comrade.
So as soon as the men who arrested him rode away, the jailer sent him back across the mountain. He stopped at a tavern and was having drinks with one of the other leaders at Kings Mountain when his son and some men from the settlements found him. They brought a horse and he returned back to the settlement. And then the governor lost the following election, and because he and Sevier were political rivals, and the fella that won the election was a supporter of Sevier, and so Sevier took the oath of allegiance to the state of North Carolina. And then in 1790, it became the Southwest Territory. Congress accepted the land, and when Tennessee became a state in 1796, only 1/3 of it was settled. It was a wilderness state, and 2/3 of the state was still Indian land.
We are in, of course, Sevier County and Sevierville. How did his name get connected to this area? Was it just chosen, or did he ever live nearby? Or, well, he lived at Marble Springs.
He lived at Marble Springs, which isn't that far away. And he did fight dragging canoe at Boyd's Creek, which is here in Sevier County. And he did win the battle. He was not successful in killing dragging canoe, but he did win the battle at Boyd's Creek, and that stopped, temporarily at least, stopped dragging canoes raids into the settlements.
Let's name some of the things that John Sevier is remembered for. He was, of course, an Indian fighter,
Yes.
a husband, how many children total?
Military leader, 18 children total.
Military
He's got
leader?
descendants in all 50 states in the United States.
Is that right? You said he was into politics some?
Yes, he was the very first governor of the state of Tennessee. He served 6 intermittent terms as Tennessee's governor, and he served in the state legislatures for North Carolina and Tennessee. And the state legislatures, both Tennessee and North Carolina, sent him to serve in the federal legislature when the capital was in Philadelphia, and again later after the capital moved to Washington, D.C.
Any other highlights of things that he can be remembered for?
I think just protecting civilization in the wilderness and establishing and protecting civilization.
Was he attracted to the wilderness? Did it give him a sense of adventure, you think?
He was. After his formal education, his father taught him the vocations that his father did to earn a living, and those became Sevier's vocations as well. And out of all of them, his favorite was farming. But the reason that he preferred farming to other vocations was it allowed him more time for what he truly loved, and that was hunting. So what actually led him into the settlements on the western side of the Appalachian Mountain was long hunting trips, going down into the wilderness in southwest Virginia and eventually across the line into North Carolina colony territory.
A lot of the earlier people, because they didn't have things like television and so forth, became storytellers. Was he ever known to be a man who could tell a good yarn or a story?
At least good enough to be elected to multiple offices.
Bravo. That's a way to end. Thank you, Bob. We appreciate it.